There's a moment in your life when you finally stop trying to be good. Not because you've lost your heart, but because you've given it to people who never learned how to hold it. You remember how it began. You thought kindness was the key that would open every door. You thought being soft would keep you safe, but instead, it made you a target for those who only understood taking. You stayed too long in rooms where your silence was mistaken for agreement. You gave too much, thinking love would notice. You apologized for existing too loudly, too honestly, too humanly. And somewhere between all the forgiveness and all the patience, you lost the sound of your own name. That's when you begin to wonder, what if goodness alone isn't strength? What if all the things you were taught about love, loyalty, and forgiveness were only half the truth? You were told to be kind, but not how to protect that kindness. You were told to forgive, but not when to walk away. You were told to love, but not how to stop bleeding for it. The world doesn't reward softness the way you think it does. It uses it, tests it, breaks it. And somewhere deep down, even you have felt it, the quiet betrayal of your own tenderness. You gave when you should have withheld. You stayed when you should have gone. You trusted when you should have watched. You kept trying to win hearts with purity. But people don't fall in love with goodness. They fall in love with what they respect. So maybe the truth isn't to stop being kind. Maybe the truth is to learn how to be dangerous too. To learn what the lion knows, that mercy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. To learn what the fox knows, that wisdom without courage becomes paralysis. There's a kind of love that begins when illusion ends. When you stop trying to be what people want and start becoming what the truth requires. When you stop performing goodness and start embodying clarity. That's what this conversation is about. Not strategy, not power, not control, but seeing the world as it is and yourself as you are. You don't need to become cruel. You don't need to lose your warmth. You only need to learn how to stop giving it away to those who haven't earned it. Because love without self-respect isn't love. It's survival in disguise. And I know you've been surviving for too long. Waking up tired in a life that feels like it's been edited by someone else. Smiling through the ache of knowing you're meant for more. More peace, more courage, more truth. You've tried every version of good the world taught you. You've tried being patient, hopeful, forgiving. You've tried to talk gently, to understand, to wait for others to meet you halfway. But what happens when they don't? What happens when goodness only leaves you hollow and unseen? That's when you start to question everything. That's when you realize it's not the world that's cruel, it's just honest. And you can either learn its language or keep suffering from the translation. When Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both," he wasn't talking about cruelty. He was talking about boundaries. He was saying respect is the foundation of every real connection. Without it, love is an illusion. You can't build truth on the hope that someone will see your worth. You must show it, stand in it, defend it. You must learn to be both gentle and formidable, both the heart that feels and the spine that doesn't bend. That's what it means to think like a ruthless strategist. Not ruthless against others, but ruthless about protecting the self you keep losing. And maybe that's why you're here now. Not because you want to manipulate or dominate, but because you're tired of being powerless in your own story. You want to see clearly. You want to love without losing yourself. You want to trust without surrendering your peace. You want to stop confusing being needed with being valued. So here's the truth. Strength isn't about becoming colder. It's about learning to stay warm in a world that tries to freeze you. It's about learning when to walk away, when to stay silent, and when to let the fire speak. Because if you keep choosing softness without wisdom, the world will keep teaching you lessons in pain. And if you keep choosing peace without power, you'll keep mistaking submission for love. But there's another way, a quieter way, where clarity becomes compassion, where truth becomes tenderness, where you stop begging to be chosen and start choosing yourself, not as rebellion, but as an act of sacred respect. So listen, not with your mind, but with the part of you that's tired of pretending, the part that already knows the truth but is afraid to live it. Let every word in this story remind you that strength and love are not enemies. They are twins born from the same fire. You don't need to earn your worth anymore. You only need to protect it. If this truth found you tonight, maybe it's because your heart was ready to hear it. If these words held you, even for a moment. Share them. Someone else might be searching in the dark too. Now take a breath, and when you're ready, there's a point when you start to see people differently, not because they've changed, but because your eyes finally have. It's strange, isn't it, how truth doesn't arrive with thunder, but with quiet recognition? You stop defending what hurt you, you stop explaining what should have been understood, and you realize that love without awareness isn't love. It's blindness with a heartbeat. You used to think goodness could fix what was broken in others, that if you just loved harder, waited longer, gave more, they would rise to meet you. But love doesn't wake those who are committed to their own sleep, and no amount of softness can change someone who finds comfort in your confusion. You learn to accept crumbs and call it connection. You mistook attention for affection. You believed their inconsistency was a sign of depth, not avoidance. And each time they pulled away, you told yourself it was because you weren't enough yet. You thought patience would make you worthy. But patience, when misplaced, is just a slow form of self-abandonment. You told yourself stories to survive. He's just busy. She's scared of love. They'll change when they see how much I care. But truth doesn't bend to your hope. It stays still, waiting for you to stop lying to yourself long enough to see it. And when you finally do, the silence that follows is unbearable. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. You can't go back to the comfort of your illusions. You can't unknow that you were begging for the very thing that was never yours to begin with. It hurts not because they deceived you, but because you deceived yourself for them. You believed in potential, not reality. You built castles on promises that were never made. And when those castles crumbled, you blamed yourself for the dust. But it wasn't your fault. You were taught to worship the idea of goodness, to equate giving with virtue, and boundaries with cruelty. You were told that to be loved, you must be pleasing, that to be safe, you must be small, and so you mastered the art of self-erasure. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You agreed when you disagreed. You stayed quiet when you should have spoken, and somewhere in that silence, you disappeared. That's the tragedy of the gentle. They believe their pain has meaning. They think that if they suffer beautifully enough, it will all make sense in the end. But pain doesn't purify you. It only shows you who benefits from your endurance. You kept forgiving people who were never sorry. You kept rebuilding bridges that led nowhere. And all the while, you told yourself it was strength when it was really fear wearing a halo. You weren't being kind. You were afraid of being alone. You weren't being patient. You were afraid of losing the illusion. You weren't being selfless. You were hoping someone would finally see how much you deserved to be chosen. But the truth is, you can't make someone see you by shrinking. You can't make someone stay by becoming smaller than their fear. You see, people reveal themselves not through their words, but through their patterns. And once you learn to read patterns instead of promises, you stop being confused. You start realizing that some people love you best when you're uncertain, because your uncertainty makes them powerful. They call it love, but what they really want is control. They give just enough warmth to keep you from leaving and just enough cold to keep you chasing. They teach you to equate unpredictability with passion and absence with depth. And you call it connection because it feels familiar. Because somewhere in your past, inconsistency was the rhythm you learned to dance to. You think chaos means care, because peace was never something you were given. But one day, you wake up, and the ache becomes unbearable. You stop trying to win what wounds you. You stop begging for clarity from those who thrive on your confusion. You stop trying to be loved into worthiness. That's when you begin to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, with the kind of calm that scares people who once fed on your chaos. You start saying less. You start waiting before you give. You start watching instead of assuming. And suddenly, you're no longer an open door for anyone who knocks. People notice. They say you've changed. They say you've become cold, detached, distant. But what they really mean is, you've stopped being available for their comfort at the expense of your peace. And that's when you begin to understand what Machiavelli meant, not about power, but about perception. He knew that those who appear too good are seen as weak, that those who never say no are treated as endless, that those who seek to please will always live at the mercy of those they please. You begin to see that boundaries are not walls, they are mirrors. They show others how to meet you. They teach people that your kindness is a privilege, not a right. And in that realization, a strange peace begins to bloom. Because once you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you start being understood by yourself. You stop needing validation from those who never saw you clearly. You stop explaining your silence, your distance, your choices. Because peace doesn't need an audience. You begin to understand that you can love people deeply and still walk away from them. That love isn't proven by endurance, but by alignment. That staying where your spirit is starving isn't devotion, it's denial. And so, you begin the slow return to yourself. You reclaim your time, your voice, your energy. You stop seeking permission to protect your peace. And in doing so, you realize that strength was never about being untouchable, it was about learning what to touch and what to release. There's a new clarity that comes with distance. You look back at all the times you said, yes, when your heart whispered, no, and you finally understand why it never worked. Because every yes that betrays your truth becomes a seed of resentment, and resentment is the quiet killer of self-respect. So now, when someone asks for more than you can give, you breathe before you answer. You weigh your peace before your guilt. You choose yourself, even when your voice shakes. At first, it feels unnatural, because you've spent years building an identity around being needed. But soon, you realize that your worth was never in your usefulness. It was in your presence, in the quiet, steady knowing of who you are when you're no longer performing for love. That's what seeing clearly does. It takes the blur of illusion and turns it into sacred solitude. It reminds you that loneliness isn't punishment, it's purification. It's the space where you stop reaching for what isn't reaching back. And in that stillness, a new kind of strength is born. Not the loud, aggressive kind the world glorifies, but the silent, grounded kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. You start walking differently. You stop chasing apologies. You stop needing explanations. You start understanding that not everyone who loses you is meant to find you again. You stop expecting closure from those who never gave you clarity, because closure isn't something they give. It's something you choose. It's the moment you stop rereading old messages, stop replaying old memories, and stop confusing pain with purpose. You begin to accept that some stories were only meant to teach you how to stop begging for love that costs your peace. And once you learn that lesson, the story is over. This is where the first door opens, the one that leads away from illusion. And on the other side, there's not bitterness, but balance. There's not revenge, but release. There's not fear, but a quiet understanding. You don't need to change people to protect your heart. You only need to see them clearly, because once you do, they lose their power over you. Not because they've become smaller, but because you finally stopped shrinking to fit inside their world. And that's where clarity begins. It begins when you realize that your softness was never the problem. It was the way you gave it, to the wrong hands, for the wrong reasons. Now, you know better. And knowing better isn't cynicism, it's freedom. Take a breath. You've made it through the illusion. Now we walk towards strength. There's a quiet moment after clarity when everything feels empty. You've seen the truth, and it's stripped you bare. The illusions are gone, and with them, the comfort of pretending. You no longer have the story that once held you, even if it hurt. You stand there, naked before the truth, unsure of who you are without the roles you used to play. That emptiness isn't a void, it's space. It's the silence after the storm, when the noise has stopped and you finally hear yourself breathe. But the silence scares you, because for so long, you've confused noise with meaning. You've mistaken movement for growth, attachment for love, pain for proof that something mattered. Now, in this stillness, you realize how much of your life was built on reaction instead of intention. You've been living defensively, protecting yourself from being unloved, unseen, unwanted. But you've never really learned how to live deliberately, how to act from truth, not fear. And this is where courage begins. Courage doesn't come with confidence. It comes with exhaustion, the kind that whispers, "I can't live like this anymore." It comes with the decision to move, even when you have no guarantee of where you'll land. It's not the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear be the author of your life. You've spent so much time waiting for closure, waiting for timing, waiting for someone to finally choose you. But waiting is just another form of hiding. It keeps you in the familiar hell of almost and maybes. It gives you the illusion of patience, when in truth, it's fear disguised as hope. The world doesn't wait for the hesitant. Life moves, relentlessly, unapologetically. And if you keep waiting for the perfect moment, you'll spend your life standing at the edge of yourself, watching it pass. You think you're afraid of failure, but you're not. You're afraid of being seen trying. You're afraid of what people will say if you step into your truth and stumble. But failure is just feedback, not about your worth, but about your alignment. The only real failure is never showing up at all. So take one step, even if it's small, even if your voice shakes when you take it, because action is how you reclaim your power. When Machiavelli wrote, "Fortune favors the bold," he wasn't glorifying recklessness. He was whispering something sacred, that life bends toward those who move. That hesitation is the slowest form of self-sabotage. That courage isn't always grand. Sometimes it's simply the choice to not look back. You've spent years analyzing, overthinking, waiting for a sign. But sometimes the sign is your own restlessness. Sometimes it's that ache in your chest that says, something has to change. And change never comes from clarity alone. It comes from motion, from stepping forward while your hands still tremble. You will never think your way into courage. You have to live your way into it. You'll make mistakes, that's certain. You'll lose people who preferred you quiet. You'll outgrow versions of yourself that once felt safe. And every time you do, you'll feel like you're dying. But you're not dying. You're molting, shedding the skin of the person you pretended to be. It will feel lonely at first, because courage often looks like solitude before it looks like strength. You'll question yourself. You'll crave the comfort of your old patterns, the familiar ache of what used to hurt. But every time you resist the pull of what's familiar, you're building something invisible, a backbone of truth. And soon, something changes. You stop begging for signs from the universe because you realize the universe speaks in the language of consequence. If it falls apart when you stop forcing it, it was never meant for you. If it hurts more to stay than to leave, the lesson is already over. You begin to trust the unfolding. You stop labeling every ending as tragedy. You start to understand that destruction is not cruelty. It's construction disguised. That sometimes life has to break your heart to free your soul. You start taking responsibility not for other people's choices, but for your own silence, your own fear, your own staying. And it's painful, that ownership, because it strips you of excuses, but it also gives you back your power. You realize that the world is not against you. It's simply responding to you. That your life expands or contracts based on the courage you bring to it. That people treat you according to the boundaries you enforce, not the kindness you offer. So you begin to test your strength in small ways. You say no when you mean no. You walk away when someone crosses your line. You tell the truth even when it shakes the room. And in those moments, you begin to taste something you haven't felt in a long time: freedom. Freedom doesn't roar. It hums quietly under your skin. It's the calm after you say what needed to be said. It's the peace after you let go of what needed to end. It's the stillness after you stop betraying yourself for belonging. And the more you taste it, the less you can tolerate anything that steals it. You realize you don't want to be loved for your softness anymore. You want to be respected for your wholeness. You want to be seen in your light and your shadow, your tenderness and your strength, and loved not in spite of it, but because of it. So you stop performing. You stop editing your truth for the comfort of others. You stop filtering your edges to fit into spaces that were built for smaller versions of you. You start walking differently, slower, steadier, more certain. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop giving people more chances than they earn. And yes, people will call you selfish, because in a world that profits from your insecurity, self-respect will always look like rebellion. But that's the point. To reclaim your power is to disappoint those who benefited from your weakness. To speak your truth is to lose the approval of those who preferred your silence. And as you grow stronger, something beautiful happens. Your empathy changes shape. It stops being a net that catches everyone's pain and becomes a flame that lights only what's yours to carry. You still care deeply, but you stop rescuing people who refuse to swim. You stop trying to convince others to rise. You stop bleeding for those who would never do the same for you. Because compassion without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. And the kindest thing you can ever do for someone is to stop enabling the behavior that keeps them small. So you walk away, not in anger, but in grace. You stop fighting for what doesn't fight for you. You stop chasing what needs distance to stay comfortable. You stop proving your worth because you finally see it was never in question to begin with. This is courage, not loud, not theatrical. Just the quiet consistency of choosing yourself again and again, even when it feels unnatural. And slowly, your life begins to change. People who once took you for granted begin to notice your silence. Situations that once drained you begin to dissolve. You find yourself surrounded not by noise, but by peace. And that peace feels foreign at first, because chaos used to be your home. But this is the new truth. You don't have to earn your right to rest. You don't have to justify your distance. You don't have to explain your healing. You only have to keep choosing it over and over, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood, even when the old you whispers, maybe go back. Because every step forward, no matter how small, is a declaration. I am no longer available for my own destruction. And one day, you'll look back and realize you didn't just survive. You evolved. You became the kind of person who doesn't chase peace. You embody it. If you're hearing this, it means the world hasn't hardened you. Not completely. You still believe in love. But now you know it starts with truth. You still believe in kindness. But now you pair it with discernment. You still believe in connection. But now you demand respect with it. And that's not ruthlessness. That's balance. That's power. That's freedom. Take another breath. You're no longer waiting. You're becoming. There's a quiet transformation that happens after courage. It doesn't come with applause or lightning. It arrives in small, unremarkable moments. The ones where you choose peace over chaos. Truth over validation. At first, it feels unnatural. You've been trained to measure your worth by how much you can endure. Now, you're learning that peace is not the absence of struggle. It's the refusal to participate in what drains your soul. You begin to notice it, the subtle pull of your old habits, the urge to explain yourself, the impulse to defend your boundaries, the need to prove that your intentions are good. But then, something inside you whispers, you don't owe anyone that much access anymore. And in that whisper, there's freedom. You start realizing that self-respect is not a feeling, it's a practice. It's the way you sit with yourself when the world misunderstands you. It's the way you refuse to trade your peace for the illusion of belonging. It's the quiet discipline of choosing truth, even when your voice trembles. At first, people resist this new version of you. They remember the one who always said yes, the one who absorbed their storms without flinching. They don't recognize the silence. They call it distance. They don't recognize your boundaries. They call it coldness. But that's only because your healing interrupts their comfort. You used to crave their approval like air. Now you crave your own respect like water. And once you taste it, there's no going back. Self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself or seek validation. It simply stands there steady, rooted, unbothered, while the world tests its edges. It knows that respect is not demanded, it's taught. And it's taught by how you treat yourself. When no one is watching, you start to see how much of your life was built around avoiding disapproval. You called it love, but it was fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being seen as too much or not enough. And so you shaped yourself into palatable forms for people who never deserved the real you. But fear is a liar. It whispers that safety comes from shrinking, when safety actually comes from standing tall. It convinces you that love is something you must earn, when love, in its purest form, is never transactional. You remember the times you softened your truth to keep the peace. You remember how that peace never lasted, because peace built on pretending always cracks under silence. Now you see that pretending is just another way of betraying yourself. And self-betrayal, no matter how noble it looks on the outside, always ends in emptiness. So you begin to choose differently. You choose honesty, even when it costs you comfort. You choose solitude, even when it aches. You choose to say no, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally learned that love without boundaries becomes a wound you keep reopening. And something miraculous happens. Your energy changes. You stop chasing what doesn't align. You stop over-explaining what was never meant to be understood. You stop apologizing for existing at your full capacity. There's a power that returns to you in those moments. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that refuses to be diminished. You no longer seek validation. You embody it. You no longer need permission. You give it to yourself. You no longer mistake silence for rejection. You recognize it as space. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about being feared and loved. He wasn't glorifying cruelty, he was revealing balance. To be feared, in this light, means to be respected enough that others cannot manipulate your goodness. To be loved means to be known without illusion, and to hold both, that's the rarest kind of power. You begin to walk with quiet authority, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that commands energy. You walk into rooms differently now, not seeking to impress, but to observe. You listen more than you speak. You see the subtext behind every word, the fear behind every act of control. You stop taking things personally, because when you have self-respect, you understand that people's behavior is a mirror of their own chaos, not your worth. Their inability to love you the way you deserve is not rejection, it's revelation. And revelation, though painful, is the first step toward liberation. You begin to see how often love was confused with power. How often people loved you only as long as they could control you. How often you stayed just to prove that your love was stronger than their fear. But love isn't measured by endurance. It's measured by alignment, by how truthfully two hearts can coexist without shrinking each other. You stop believing in potential. You start believing in patterns. You stop waiting for promises to become people. You start trusting your intuition over their explanations. And slowly, clarity becomes your default, not your crisis. You notice that your circle grows smaller, but it also grows cleaner. You attract people who are drawn to your steadiness, not your chaos. People who match your energy, not drain it. People who respect your silence as much as your words. And that's when you understand the moment you respect yourself, you start teaching others how to do the same. You no longer have to explain your worth. Your presence does it for you. Your boundaries stop feeling like armor and start feeling like peace. But self-respect isn't always easy. There will be moments when it feels like loss, when walking away feels like defeat, when choosing yourself feels like betrayal. But those moments are sacred tests. They ask, will you abandon yourself again just to be loved? And this time, you answer with silence, because silence is how the healed speak their truth. You start to notice beauty in solitude. You no longer confuse aloneness with loneliness. You begin to see that solitude is where your power regenerates. It's where you recalibrate your energy, where you remember that you are not behind. You're just no longer rushing toward what's wrong. You stop begging for closure because you've learned that peace doesn't come from explanations. It comes from acceptance. It comes from letting what no longer fits simply fall away. It comes from releasing the need to be chosen because you finally understand you were never unworthy. You were just trying to be loved by people who didn't know how to see you. Now, you see yourself. You see how every wound taught you discernment, how every rejection built your backbone, how every ending brought you closer to wholeness. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop glorifying suffering, because healing isn't about proving your endurance, it's about remembering your worth. And when you finally taste self-respect, you realize it's not bitter, it's clean. It's the taste of alignment, of walking in truth, of knowing that your peace is not negotiable anymore. You start to love differently now, not with desperation, but with discernment, not with fear, but with freedom. You stop needing to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And when you love from that place, it's not about possession, it's about partnership. It's not about fixing anyone. It's about growing together without losing yourself. You'll still have moments of doubt. You'll still feel the pull of old patterns. But now, you catch yourself faster. You forgive yourself softer. You rise again quieter. And that's what growth really looks like. Not perfection, but gentleness with your evolution. So here you are, standing taller, clearer, quieter. You no longer fight for your worth. You live from it. And that's a revolution that needs no witnesses. If this truth finds you tonight, let it remind you you're not hard. You're honest. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not selfish. You're sacred. You're becoming the person you always needed, the one who never abandons themselves again. There comes a time when softness alone can no longer carry you, when you realize that love without strength collapses under its own weight, that kindness without boundaries becomes an open wound, and forgiveness without discernment is just surrender wearing a halo. This is the moment you begin to awaken the lion within you. Not the loud, raging lion the world imagines, but the silent one, the lion that moves only when it must, that doesn't roar to be feared, but stands so still, so certain, that fear becomes irrelevant. For so long, you believed strength meant hardness, the clenched jaw, the closed heart, the refusal to feel. But that isn't strength. That's fear dressed in armor. True strength is quieter. It's knowing what you stand for and not needing to shout it. It's walking away from what dishonors you without needing to explain why. It's refusing to fight battles that require you to shrink. You used to think you had to prove your worth. Now you know your worth proves itself in how little you tolerate what doesn't align. There's a discipline that comes with becoming the lion. It's not about dominance. It's about direction. It's about learning when to stay still and when to strike, when to speak and when silence is the sharpest answer, when to protect and when to let the lesson unfold on its own. You stop wasting energy on convincing others of your truth. You realize that explanation is a gift, not an obligation. And not everyone deserves access to your reasoning, because some people don't listen to understand, they listen to disarm. The lion in you knows this. It saves its breath for what matters. It no longer roars at every provocation. It knows that silence is not weakness. It's strategy born of peace. You start seeing the power in restraint, the quiet majesty of someone who no longer reacts from emotion, but responds from clarity. You don't chase validation anymore. You embody certainty. You don't fight for your value. You live from it, and that shift changes everything. People who once drained you start to fall away not because you pushed them, but because your peace no longer feeds their chaos. Those who were drawn to your confusion lose interest in your calm. You stop being the easy target for people who need to test their control, because you no longer need to prove your goodness to those who thrive on misunderstanding it. There's a power in being still. The lion knows this. It doesn't chase its prey, it watches. It waits. It trusts timing, not urgency, because urgency is the language of fear, and the lion speaks only in certainty. You begin to move through life differently, no longer reacting to every insult, every absence, every silence. You see things as they are, not as they used to make you feel. You realize that not every wound deserves your energy, not every critic deserves your response, not every betrayal deserves your vengeance. The lion doesn't waste time explaining itself to sheep. And this isn't arrogance, it's awareness. It's understanding that your time, your attention, your peace, they are currencies of the soul, and not everyone can afford them. You learn that real power is not about control. It's about containment. It's about keeping your energy sacred, your presence intentional, your silence deliberate. You no longer fight to be understood. You simply understand that not everyone is ready to meet you at this level of clarity. You stop teaching people lessons they refuse to learn. You stop returning to fires that have already burned you. This is the lion's wisdom. That mercy doesn't always mean staying. That compassion sometimes looks like walking away. That strength isn't in how much you can take, but in how much you refuse to accept anymore. And yet, even in this power, the lion remains gentle, because true strength doesn't destroy. It protects. It guards what's sacred. It doesn't lash out. It knows its capacity for damage and chooses not to use it. That's what makes the lion divine. Not its roar, but its restraint. You start feeling that in yourself. You no longer need to react to disrespect with anger. You no longer meet manipulation with defensiveness. You no longer need to make people regret losing you. Your absence does that on its own. This is what Machiavelli meant. In essence, that fear and love are not enemies, but two sides of respect. To be feared, in the truest sense, is to be recognized as someone who cannot be moved by flattery or guilt. To be loved, in the highest sense, is to be seen by those who can meet your depth without needing to control it. You learn to balance both, to command respect through stillness, to inspire love through integrity. The lion in you learns patience. It doesn't rush what's meant. It knows that everything that's truly aligned will meet you halfway, Not because you demanded it, but because you didn't chase it. There's a quiet dignity in that, a serenity that comes from knowing you no longer need to win every battle, because you finally understand you are the kingdom, not the soldier. The lion doesn't need to prove its power. It only needs to remember it. And that remembering changes everything. You begin to protect your energy with reverence. You start saying no without guilt. You leave without drama. You trust endings without resentment, because you finally understand that endings aren't punishment, they are preservation. The lion knows this. It doesn't fight every hunter. It retreats when it must, rests when it needs to, and returns when the time is right. You stop measuring strength by how much you can carry. You start measuring it by how little you allow to weigh you down. You stop glorifying endurance. You start honoring ease, and soon, something miraculous happens. Peace becomes your baseline. You don't have to fight for it anymore. It lives in your tone, your presence, your decisions. It's the quiet authority of someone who no longer negotiates with chaos. You begin to understand that true leadership in love, in life, in self, is not about control. It's about clarity. It's about seeing things as they are and moving with grace through what you cannot change. And in that grace, you find freedom. You no longer need revenge. You no longer need validation. You no longer need to be understood by everyone. You only need to be understood by yourself. And when you look in the mirror, you no longer see the one who begged to be chosen. You see the one who learned to choose themselves quietly, unapologetically, completely. That's what it means to be the lion. Not ruthless but real, not hard but whole, not feared but respected. If this truth finds you now, let it remind you. Your power doesn't come from how loudly you roar, but from how calmly you stand. You don't need to prove you're strong. You only need to remember you are. And if these words reach the part of you that's been waiting to rise, share them. Someone else may still be hiding from their roar. After the lion awakens, something quieter begins to stir. Not strength this time, but sight. The kind of sight that no longer looks for goodness, but for truth. The part of you that once rushed into people's warmth now stands still, watching, listening, learning. This is the rise of the fox. Not the trickster the world warns you about, but the one who knows how to see the invisible, the shifts in tone, the weight in silence, the things people say without words. You used to take everything at face value. You mistook effort for loyalty, apology for change, interest for intention. But the fox knows better. It doesn't react to words, it reads the space between them. It doesn't fall for performance, it looks for patterns. It doesn't believe in promises, it studies consistency. Because that's the wisdom the lion doesn't always have. The subtlety to know that not every enemy looks like a threat. Some come wrapped in kindness. Some sound like admiration. Some smile when they mean to wound. The fox teaches you to see all of it without hate, to observe human nature without flinching, to know that deceit is not always evil. Sometimes it's just weakness disguised as charm. That betrayal is not always planned sometimes. It's just fear acting faster than love. You stop being shocked by people. You stop expecting them to be better than they are. And in that acceptance, you become free, because disappointment is only born from expectation, and the fox has no illusions left to break. It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you start loving with eyes open. You stop confusing understanding with permission. You stop calling someone's potential a promise. You stop forgiving behavior that's still ongoing. The fox in you smiles more quietly now, not with naivety, but with knowledge. It knows that truth doesn't need to be announced. It reveals itself in time. It knows that patience is not passivity. It's strategy, guided by peace. You watch people's actions, not their declarations. You start noticing who checks in only when they need something, who compliments you to control you, who mirrors your words to create false safety. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. At first, this awareness hurts, because it makes you realize how often you were played by your own empathy, how your need to believe in people made you ignore what was obvious, how you kept handing your loyalty to those who saw it as leverage. But pain is how wisdom enters, and this time you don't run from it. You let it sharpen you. You let it turn your kindness into clarity. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. You stop offering truth to those committed to misunderstanding it. You stop opening your soul to those who see it as a map to your weaknesses. Because the fox knows your vulnerability is sacred currency, and not everyone deserves access to your unguarded heart. You start conserving your energy the way you once gave it away generously, but wisely. You learn to observe before you invest, to let time reveal what flattery hides, to let distance clarify what presence confuses. And soon, you notice something extraordinary. Your peace is no longer reactive. You stop being pulled into every emotional current around you. You stop personalizing every mood, every silence, every slight. Because now you see that most people are not attacking you. They're projecting themselves. The fox doesn't take things personally. It studies behavior, not emotion. It understands that people act from their wounds, and that sometimes the best response is no response at all. You begin to master emotional detachment, not the cold kind, but the compassionate kind that understands. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to let their chaos invade your peace. You no longer chase closure, you observe cycles. You no longer demand loyalty, you notice consistency. You no longer cling to potential, you accept patterns. And the world begins to feel lighter, because now you're no longer fighting people's illusions, you're walking with their truth. The fox teaches you the art of discernment, to know the difference between someone who wants to connect and someone who wants to consume, between those who see you and those who only see what they can take, between love that nourishes and love that drains. And the moment you start living with that awareness, your life begins to reorganize itself. The drama starts fading, the confusion quiets, the noise dissolves, because you are no longer trying to prove your purity in a world that profits from your blindness. You move through life with a certain lightness now. You say less, but mean more. You give less, but give wisely. You listen not to reply, but to understand. And when someone tries to manipulate you, you no longer feel anger, only clarity. You recognize the move, the tactic, the game, and instead of reacting, you simply step aside. That's the fox's way, never fighting what can be outmaneuvered by silence. The lion gives you strength to stand. The fox gives you grace to see. Together, they make you untouchable, because now you can love without losing your boundaries. You can care without being consumed. You can forgive without forgetting what you learned. You stop trying to fix people, you let them reveal themselves. You stop seeking validation. You let time filter the false. You stop performing purity. You start practicing presence. And in this new presence, something beautiful unfolds. You realize that not everyone is meant to stay. Some are meant to awaken you. Not everyone is meant to love you right. Some are meant to teach you where you lost yourself. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Some are meant to misunderstand you, so you can stop explaining. You see now that wisdom doesn't always look kind. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like walking away without words. Sometimes it looks like being misunderstood and staying silent anyway, because silence is the language of those who have nothing left to prove. You used to think people needed to see your side. Now you know truth doesn't need defense. It only needs time. So you wait, not anxiously, not fearfully, but like the fox waits, patient and watchful, trusting that everything false eventually reveals itself. You stop rushing clarity, you let it arrive in its own rhythm, and in doing so, you realize that peace is not a destination, it's a perspective. It's the art of watching the storm and remembering you are not the wind. You don't have to control everything to be safe. You don't have to predict every outcome to be prepared. You don't have to expose every lie to stay in truth. The fox knows sometimes the smartest move is the quietest one, and you, who once overgave and overexplained, begin to fall in love with your new stillness. You find power in not responding. You find freedom in not needing closure. You find peace in not chasing understanding. Because now, you finally understand yourself. You see through people's masks not with anger but with empathy. You see that everyone's wearing armor. Everyone's protecting their own pain. And you don't need to take it personally anymore. You just keep walking softly, wisely, unseen when needed, visible only to those who have earned the right to see you. This is what maturity feels like. Not cynicism, but serenity. Not distrust, but discernment. Not détachement, but direction. You move with grace now because you've stopped confusing chaos with passion. You've stopped mistaking noise for depth. You've stopped giving your soul to anything that can't meet it in silence. The fox has taught you to see without reacting, to listen without absorbing, to care without collapsing, and that is wisdom. If this truth found you, let it remind you that awareness isn't bitterness, it's freedom. You're not colder. You're just clear. You're not distant. You're discerning. You're not done loving. You're just done losing yourself while doing it. You are both lion and fox now. Strength and sight. Heart and edge. Fire and frost. Living in balance. There's a moment, after you've learned to see and to stand, when something else begins to settle in. A stillness that feels new, but also ancient. It's the beginning of self-command, the quiet art of ruling your inner world. You no longer live as a reaction to what others do. You no longer hand your peace to anyone with the courage to touch your triggers. You start to understand that the loudest wars are the ones inside you, and that mastery isn't about control, it's about composition. It's about keeping the rhythm of your heart steady while everything around you trembles. You remember how it used to be. Every silence from someone you loved felt like rejection. Every delay in a text felt like proof you'd done something wrong. Every shift in tone sent you spiraling. You mistook uncertainty for danger because peace had never lasted long enough to feel safe. Now you breathe differently. When the silence comes, you listen to it instead of fearing it. When the tension rises, you hold your ground instead of defending your worth. When doubt whispers they might leave, you answer, then they were never meant to stay. This is what it means to command yourself to be the calmest person in your own story. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop fleeing every feeling that hurts. You learn to sit with discomfort like an old teacher. You ask it what it came to show you. Sometimes it tells you about your boundaries. Sometimes it shows you your old wounds. Sometimes it simply reminds you that you're still human, alive enough to ache. You used to chase control because you didn't trust uncertainty. But control is just another name for fear. You don't need to predict outcomes anymore. You need to hold presence. Because presence is where power lives. Not in the future you can't reach. Not in the past you can't repair, but here, in this breath, in this choice, in this refusal to abandon yourself again. You start responding to life instead of reacting to it. You don't answer every message right away. You don't rush to fill every silence. You let time reveal what urgency used to hide. You've stopped being addicted to proving your worth through immediacy. Now, your pauses speak louder than your words ever did. People notice. They test you. They push. They pull. They wait for the old you to resurface, the one who panicked at distance, who bent at pressure, who mistook chaos for connection. But she's gone. You've buried her under layers of awareness and grace. You no longer chase explanations from those who thrive on confusion. You no longer argue with projections disguised as accusation. You no longer try to heal people who find safety in their wound. You simply let them be. Because the moment you stop trying to fix everyone, you start to rise above the noise they create. And that's where power becomes peace. You begin to understand why empires fall from within. Because they forget discipline. The same happens inside us. When you let resentment rule, you destroy your own walls. When you let fear govern, you betray your own crown. But when you lead yourself with calm, you become unshakable. Self-command is not coldness. It's devotion to your balance, your truth, your energy. It's knowing that your emotions are messengers, not masters. That anger can protect, sadness can cleanse, joy can guide. If you listen without letting them drive, you start setting rhythms for your days. Not routines born from control, but rituals born from reverence. You wake not to rush, but to return to yourself. You eat, you walk, you rest. Not as tasks, as ceremonies of respect, because when you honor your body, you remind your mind that it is safe. The world still throws storms at you. People still disappoint. Plans still fail. But now, you don't crumble with them. You bend, you breathe, you wait. You let the dust settle before deciding what the wreckage means. Sometimes, the wreckage is liberation in disguise. Sometimes, loss is life removing what your courage couldn't. And when you see it that way, pain stops feeling like punishment. It becomes proof of movement, evidence that you are alive enough to evolve. You used to fear endings. Now you honor them. You see how every goodbye carved space for something more aligned. How every closed door protected you from what wasn't meant to hold your light. You stop forcing what resists You stop begging fate to reconsider. You start trusting redirection as sacred precision. This is leadership not over others, but over yourself. You lead by example, even when no one's watching. You stay kind without being naive. You stay open without being exposed. You give without expecting to be owed, because giving is no longer about being loved. It's about staying aligned. You realize you don't have to win every argument to live in truth. You don't have to be understood to be at peace. You don't have to be right to be free. All you need is to remain honest, especially when no one is listening. Self-command changes how you love. You stop choosing people who make you prove yourself. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You start valuing stability over spark, peace over performance. You learn that a quiet relationship can hold more passion than a chaotic one ever could, because peace is the highest form of attraction for the healed. You also start leading with grace in conflict. You stop matching energy. You maintain yours. You stop retaliating. You redirect. You stop arguing to be heard. You start leaving when you're not, because your dignity doesn't need an audience. And in that grace, your life begins to align itself around your stillness. The right people find you and stay. The wrong ones fall away without noise. Opportunities appear where chaos once blocked your vision, because calmness clears paths that fear keeps hidden. One evening, you realize you haven't over-explained yourself in months. You haven't apologized for your peace. You haven't chased what left, and it hits you. You're finally safe inside yourself. That's the rarest power of all. To feel at home in your own skin, to know that no matter who leaves, you remain, to stand so firmly in your truth that even your fears begin to trust you. Machiavelli once wrote that stability belongs to those who can govern themselves before they seek to govern others. Now you understand what he meant, because when you master your reactions, you master your reality. When you rule your emotions with compassion instead of repression, you stop being a subject of circumstance, you become its sovereign. This is not about perfection. You will still falter. You will still cry on the bathroom floor sometimes, but even then, you will feel the quiet hum beneath the pain, the knowing that you can rebuild, that you are not lost, that the throne inside you is unshaken. That's what self-command feels like, not the absence of emotion, but the presence of faith. Faith that you can face whatever comes and remain intact. If this truth found you tonight, let it remind you that power isn't about control, it's about trust. And trust begins with you. You are the calm inside your own storm now, the steady hand on your own pulse, the leader your younger self needed. Something shifts when you learn to command yourself. The world stops feeling like a battlefield and begins to feel like a conversation. A long, quiet, mysterious exchange between what you give and what life gives back. You start to notice that people respond differently to you now. Not because you've become harder, but because you've become clearer. Your silence carries weight. Your presence feels grounded. You no longer chase connection, you invite it. And that's the beginning of a new kind of influence. Not the manipulative kind, the magnetic kind. The kind that doesn't pull by force, but by frequency. People can feel when you've made peace with yourself. They can sense when you no longer need their validation. And it draws them in not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. They see in you something they've been searching for. Someone who listens without absorbing, who loves without losing, who stays without surrendering their center. You used to think influence came from being liked, from pleasing, agreeing, accommodating. Now you see, influence comes from alignment, from knowing who you are so clearly that other people's confusion can't shake it. You start speaking differently. You no longer rush to fill the air. You let silence do some of the talking. You speak less often, but when you do, people listen, because your words aren't for approval anymore. They're for truth. And that truth doesn't need to be sharp to be strong. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It simply lands, like a soft arrow, gentle in its flight, but impossible to ignore. Once it finds its mark, you begin to understand the quiet mechanics of connection, that people trust consistency more than charm, that they respect boundaries more than promises, that they remember how you made them feel safe, not how much you said you cared. You start leading with energy instead of effort. You realize that calm is contagious, that your steadiness gives others permission to stop performing, that real leadership in love, in life, in presence, is not about control, but about coherence. You can sit across from someone who is unraveling and remain whole. You can listen to anger without absorbing its heat. You can walk through tension without adding to it, because you've learned the art of staying anchored. That's the lion's gift, presence, and the fox's gift, perception. Together, they make you luminous without noise. People who once dismissed your kindness now respect your calm. People who once manipulated your empathy now sense the boundary behind your smile. They don't know what changed, only that they can no longer touch you in the same way. And that's the silent revolution of healing. You stop being readable to those who once relied on your confusion. You begin to see that love isn't about merging. It's about mirroring, two whole beings reflecting truth back to each other. Not taking, not fixing, not rescuing, just witnessing. You no longer chase compatibility. You build it patiently through presence. You no longer confuse attraction with alignment. You understand that chemistry means nothing if it costs your clarity. You stop giving advice that no one asked for. You stop trying to save people from their lessons. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can hold, because you finally know helping isn't always healing. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the fire you once kept them from. That's how influence becomes wisdom, when it stops being about control and starts being about example. Your power is no longer in your persuasion, but in your embodiment. You teach by how you live. You heal others by how you honor your boundaries. You lead not by convincing, but by being. People feel that. They can't always name it, but they feel it. The peace, the gravity, the steadiness, the refusal to engage in unnecessary chaos, the absence of performative kindness, the presence of real compassion. You walk into a room and you don't need to announce yourself. Your energy does it for you. It says, "I am here, but I am not here to be consumed." It says, "I am open, but I am not available to everyone." It says, "I love deeply, but I love wisely." And the people who are ready for that kind of presence will find you. The ones who aren't will fall away. Not because you rejected them, but because they can no longer resonate with your peace. Influence isn't about reaching everyone. It's about being real enough that the right ones recognize you. You learn that power and kindness aren't opposites. They're siblings. That firmness doesn't make you unkind, and empathy doesn't make you weak. That the most compassionate thing you can do is to stay rooted in your truth, even when it makes others uncomfortable. You stop bending for comfort. You start standing for clarity. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. That's how revolutions begin quietly, in hearts that have remembered their own authority. You start to love differently now, not from need, but from fullness. You can give without losing balance. You can stay without self-sacrifice. You can walk away without hate. You realize that love doesn't have to burn to be real. It can be calm. It can be kind. It can be steady. The world taught you to chase intensity, but peace was what your heart was always searching for. And now that you've found it, you protect it like sacred ground. You don't apologize for being discerning anymore. You don't feel guilty for saying no. You don't hide your standards to seem easygoing, because you finally understand that your standards aren't demands. They're reflections of your self-respect. You no longer try to control how people see you. You simply act in alignment with your truth and let their perception reveal their character. You stop worrying about who's talking behind your back. You start trusting that the right ones will see what's real, and the rest were never your audience anyway. The fox in you smiles at that, because it knows real influence isn't about being seen by many, it's about being remembered by the right few. You carry yourself differently now, your eyes softer but wiser, your voice lower but clearer, your laughter quieter but real. You're no longer performing, you're simply existing, and that's enough. And in that existence, you start to attract people who speak your new language. They don't demand your energy, they respect it. They don't test your boundaries, they mirror them. They don't compete with your calm, they join it. And that's when you realize the universe was never withholding love from you. It was waiting for you to stop accepting counterfeits. The people who meet you here, at this level of peace, will feel like home because they'll see you without needing to own you. They'll respect the silence between words. They'll match your calm with presence. This is what it means to love from power, to connect without collapsing, to give without disappearing, to influence without control. You've become what you once searched for, a steady presence in a world that glorifies noise, a calm soul in a sea of chaos, a reminder that love doesn't need to hurt to feel real. If this truth finds you now, let it remind you, you are allowed to be both kind and commanding. You are allowed to be both soft and certain. You are allowed to lead, not through fear, but through quiet grace, because real influence isn't about changing people. It's about inspiring them to change themselves. After meeting you, there comes a time when even peace starts to feel foreign. You've spent so many years in survival mode that calmness can feel like emptiness and stillness can feel like something's wrong. But that's only because you're entering a new season, one where peace is no longer the prize at the end of chaos, but the ground beneath your feet. You've begun to understand something essential. The world will never stop being unpredictable. People will still lie. Love will still falter. Fortune will still shift like wind. But your power was never in controlling the storm. It was in becoming the calm within it. You used to chase safety in other people. You built your sense of self around their moods, their words, their attention. If they were kind, you felt worthy. If they withdrew, you felt invisible. You made their approval your mirror. But now, you've broken the mirror. You've stopped measuring your reflection in someone else's glass. That's what clarity gives you, not perfection, but perspective. It doesn't make life easier. It makes it honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is the only soil truth can grow in. You start noticing how often people fear honesty, how they call it cruelty, because it burns their illusions. But you've lived inside illusions before. You know how suffocating they are. You know what it feels like to beg for truth while pretending everything's fine. You know the exhaustion of smiling while breaking. So now, you choose truth even when it's sharp, because you've learned that love built on lies isn't love. It's dependency dressed in poetry. You'd rather be cut by honesty than caressed by deceit. There's freedom in that choice. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer beg to be seen. You no longer twist yourself into palatable versions to keep fragile peace. You say what you mean, gently but clearly. You listen more than you explain. You no longer chase belonging in places where truth has to hide to survive. That's how clarity becomes peace. Not the loud kind that demands validation, but the quiet kind that breathes within you. Like a secret you finally trust, you begin to see that peace isn't passive. It's not a lack of feeling. It's the mastery of focus. It's knowing what deserves your energy and what deserves your absence. It's not pretending that life is kind, but knowing that you are strong enough to face it when it's not. And in that knowing, you start to live lighter. You stop gripping everything so tightly. People, outcomes, expectations. You stop chasing closure from every open door. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen, because clarity has taught you the sacredness of surrender. Surrender isn't giving up. It's giving back what was never yours to control. It's allowing life to unfold without begging it to match your timeline. It's trusting that what is meant for you will not need to be forced. You see now that so much of your suffering came from resistance, from clinging to what was fading, from fearing what was arriving, from trying to write a story that was already being written for you. You begin to let go, not dramatically, not ceremoniously, but quietly. In your heart, you start releasing the need to be understood, the need to fix every fracture, the need to always know what's next. You start finding beauty in not knowing. You start calling uncertainty what it really is, freedom, because control was never peace. It was just the illusion of safety. But real safety comes from trust. Trust in yourself, trust in your path, trust that you can survive truth, even when it hurts. You start moving differently through the world. No longer bracing for pain, no longer chasing highs, no longer apologizing for needing quiet. You walk slower, you speak softer, you see clearer, you smile more, but for real this time. You understand that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I can handle this," even when no one is watching. The lion in you no longer needs to prove its power. The fox in you no longer needs to prove its wisdom. You are no longer halves trying to balance. You are whole. And wholeness feels strange at first, because for years, your identity was built on fixing, on chasing, on earning. Now, it's built on being, and being just being feels like grace. You no longer romanticize a struggle. You no longer chase drama disguised as depth. You no longer confuse attention for affection. You start craving peace the way you once craved intensity, because you finally understand peace is the truest passion. It takes courage to live quietly in a world that worships noise. It takes faith to stay grounded when everyone else is running, but you've stopped seeking excitement in pain disguised as love. You've started finding beauty in the ordinary rhythm of calm days, the morning light through the curtains, the taste of coffee without distraction, the sound of your own breathing when you're no longer waiting for someone to reply, the small, sacred details of a life that finally feels like yours. You used to think peace meant loneliness. Now you see it as intimacy, the deepest kind, the kind that happens between you and your soul when there's nothing left to hide. You no longer fill every silence. You let it speak, because silence, you've learned, isn't the absence of connection. It's the space where connection deepens. And when love comes again, and it will, you'll meet it differently. You won't lose yourself this time. You won't rush to merge. You won't mistake chaos for chemistry. You'll know that love isn't meant to rescue you. It's meant to walk beside you. Two sovereign beings meeting in mutual respect, not mutual dependency. That's the highest form of power. Not control, not dominance, but balance. You begin to understand that Machiavelli's truths, once sharp and political, were always spiritual in disguise. To know human nature is not to condemn it, but to accept it, and in accepting it, you become untouchable. Because when you see people clearly, you stop being shocked by their shadows. You stop being wounded by what you can predict. You stop being destroyed by what you can understand. That's what freedom feels like. Not invincibility, but awareness. The knowing that everything external can shift, collapse, vanish, and you will still remain. You start trusting yourself more than outcomes. You stop asking, will this last? And start asking, is this real now? You stop asking, do they love me enough? And start asking, do I love myself here? You stop asking, what if it ends? And start saying, then it ends, and I'll still be whole. That's when truth becomes love, because truth, in its purest form, isn't cruel, it's cleansing. It doesn't destroy, it liberates. It strips away the noise until only what's real remains. And you are what's real, beneath all the roles, all the masks, all the survival strategies. You were never broken, just hidden, just waiting for the noise to stop. So here you are. The world hasn't gotten easier, but you've stopped making it harder. You've stopped fighting reality. You've stopped demanding softness from stone. You've stopped seeking permission to be at peace, because peace isn't something given, it's something claimed. And tonight, you have claimed it. If this truth found you, let it remind you, you are not behind. You are not late. You are simply arriving here, now, at the intersection of courage and calm. You've become the proof that clarity can coexist with compassion, that truth can live beside tenderness, that power doesn't have to be cruel, and that peace doesn't have to be quiet. It can hum beneath your skin, like a song only your soul can hear. There's a tenderness that returns after power, not the fragile kind you used to carry, but a tenderness born from strength, the kind that no longer fears being hurt because it knows it can heal. You begin to notice this softness in yourself. It moves differently now. It isn't naive, it's aware. It isn't desperate, it's deliberate. You've learned that love doesn't have to cost your peace to feel real. It can be both gentle and grounded, both open and guarded, both compassionate and clear. This is what it means to love after awakening, to hold your truth without using it as a weapon, to keep your heart open without handing it to everyone who asks. You don't need to shut down to stay safe anymore. You only need to stay aware. For the first time, your love feels steady. You no longer rush to prove it. You no longer beg for it to be received. You let it flow naturally, without expectation, without strategy, without fear, because you've learned that love, when it's true, doesn't demand performance. It doesn't ask you to shrink or to shine on command. It simply invites you to be fully, wholly, unapologetically yourself. You used to think love meant giving everything. Now you understand, real love doesn't want everything. It just wants truth. It doesn't need constant reassurance. It doesn't punish honesty. It doesn't disappear when boundaries appear. You've stopped chasing love that costs your peace. You've stopped calling chaos passion You've stopped romanticizing pain. You've stopped trying to earn what should have been freely given. And in that stillness, you discover a new form of compassion, the kind that doesn't confuse empathy with sacrifice. You can see someone's wounds now without volunteering to bleed with them. You can listen without absorbing, care without carrying, love without losing. You start to see the patterns in others with the same softness you now give yourself. You notice the fear behind their anger, the loneliness behind their pride, the confusion behind their distance. And you don't take it personally anymore. You simply recognize it, you understand it, and then you choose your response from clarity, not reaction. This is the quiet art of compassion. It's not about saving anyone. It's about seeing them clearly and loving them anyway, even if loving them means letting them go. You learn that boundaries and compassion can coexist in the same breath. That saying no can be an act of love. That walking away can be the most honest prayer you'll ever offer for someone, because sometimes love doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means allowing people to meet their own truth without you softening it for them. You've stopped trying to make everyone comfortable, because comfort often breeds stagnation, and you've outgrown the version of yourself that kept shrinking to avoid confrontation. You used to think peace meant pleasing. Now you know peace means presence, being fully in your truth even when it shakes the room. You no longer rush to fill the silence when others pull away. You no longer chase after their understanding. You understand that distance is information and silence is often an answer. You used to take every absence as rejection. Now you see it as redirection. You used to take every misunderstanding as a wound. Now you see it as a filter. Not everyone was meant to understand you. Only those who share your frequency will hear you clearly, and that's okay. You don't need the whole world to love you. You only need to stay in alignment with your own heart, because when your heart is aligned, love finds you in every form, in friendship, in solitude, in purpose, in peace. You start to see that compassion isn't weakness, it's wisdom with warmth. It's the ability to stay kind without being consumed. It's understanding that everyone is fighting something unseen, but not allowing that truth to excuse cruelty. It's the balance of heart and edge, of forgiveness and accountability. You learn to forgive quietly, not as a performance, but as a release. You forgive because you deserve peace, not because they deserve a second chance. You forgive without reopening the door. You forgive and remain free. And forgiveness begins to change shape. It stops being a favor you grant to others and becomes a way of returning to yourself. It's not about letting them off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the leash of their memory. You forgive the ones who couldn't love you right. You forgive the ones who didn't know how to stay. You forgive the ones who never said sorry. Not because what they did was right, but because you refuse to let their absence keep dictating your presence. That's compassion. Not erasing the wound, but deciding it no longer owns you. And as you soften again, something inside you blooms, a quiet grace that doesn't need recognition. You start to smile more easily, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing has power over you anymore. You've stopped waiting for life to apologize. You've stopped waiting for the past to make sense. You've stopped waiting for people to come back better. You've started living in the present, where nothing needs to be perfect to be sacred. You begin to see beauty again, in the way the light hits a wall, in the sound of your own laughter, in the peace of a night with no messages left unread. You find beauty in the mundane because clarity has made you sensitive to the miracle of stillness. The world hasn't changed, but you have. And because you have, everything looks different now. You see how love is everywhere, in kindness, in resilience, in truth. You see that even pain was love in disguise, teaching you what you wouldn't have learned any other way. You see that even loss was grace, leading you back to yourself. You no longer fight the lessons. You thank them. You no longer curse the past. You understand it. You no longer chase the future. You trust it. That's what it means to live awakened, to move through the world, not needing it to be softer, but choosing to be gentler anyway, to hold strength without aggression, to hold truth without arrogance, to hold compassion without self-destruction. The fox in you watches with calm wisdom. The lion in you stands with quiet power. Together, they bow, not to others, but to life itself, to the strange, cruel, beautiful dance that brought you here. You realize that this peace, this clarity, this gentleness was never the end goal. It was the way home. If this truth found you tonight, let it remind you. You don't have to choose between being powerful and being kind. You were always meant to be both. The world needs hearts like yours. Strong enough to stay soft, clear enough to stay open, wise enough to love without losing. By now, the noise that used to fill your life has gone quiet. The old versions of you, the ones who begged, chased, explained, they don't speak as loudly anymore. Sometimes you still hear their echoes, but they no longer command you. They are memories, now gentle reminders of how far you've come. This is the calm after every storm you survive. Not the empty kind of calm that follows defeat, but the living kind that comes when you've made peace with what once broke you. The world hasn't softened, but you have learned to move through it with grace. You don't flinch when someone disappoints you. You don't spiral when things don't go your way. You don't panic when life shifts suddenly, because now you know change is not loss. It's movement, and movement is proof that you're still alive. You remember how you once fought every ending. You tried to drag what was dying back to life. You mistook persistence for loyalty and pain for proof that something mattered. Now you understand that endings are sacred. They are life's way of creating space for what's next. They are grace disguised as grief. You no longer try to fix what's meant to fall apart. You no longer chase what's running. You no longer beg the world to stay the same. You've learned that peace isn't in holding tighter, it's in knowing when to let go. And letting go has become your quiet revolution, because release is the purest form of trust. It says, I believe in what remains when everything else leaves. You no longer measure your life by what you gain, but by what you no longer need to prove. You no longer define success by what you possess, but by how lightly you can walk without losing yourself. You no longer look for happiness in arrival. You find it in motion, in the steady rhythm of becoming, in the breath between what was and what will be. You start to see that every heartbreak was a teacher, every failure a doorway, every silence a mirror. Nothing was wasted. Every loss shaped your truth. Every wound refined your compassion. Every betrayal deepened your understanding of loyalty. You are the sum of everything you've endured, but you are no longer owned by any of it. The lion in you stands tall in this awareness. The fox in you moves lightly through it, and together, they lead you into a new kind of life, one not ruled by fear, but guided by peace. You live more simply now, not because you've given up on desire, but because you've learned discernment. You know what actually nourishes you: a clear mind, a slow morning, honest conversation, the sound of laughter that doesn't cost you your dignity. You crave what's real, what's sustainable, what doesn't need performance to exist. You start to see beauty everywhere, in imperfection, in incompleteness, in everything that breathes and breaks and still chooses to continue. You understand that life is not meant to be conquered, it's meant to be witnessed. There's no longer a war between who you were and who you are becoming. You have integrated them both, the naive one who believed love could fix everything, and the wise one who knows love's limits. They've made peace, because both were necessary, both were parts of your becoming. And now, your presence carries something that can't be faked. A quiet authority that doesn't need explanation, a soft confidence that doesn't need validation. People feel it. They can sense that you've walked through your own fire and emerged whole, that you have learned the difference between noise and truth, that you will no longer trade your peace for belonging. You live differently now. You don't rush. You don't hustle. You don't perform. You respond to life instead of reacting to it. You listen before you speak. You act from clarity instead of impulse. And when you love fully, but never blindly again. You've learned that love is not about possession, but about presence. It's not about keeping. It's about seeing. It's not about demanding. It's about honoring. And when you give it now, it comes from abundance, not scarcity. You also know that truth, when spoken with love, is the highest form of kindness. You no longer lie to keep people comfortable. You no longer hide to keep them from leaving. You've realized that honesty may lose you some things, but dishonesty will cost you yourself, and you're done paying that price. There's a serenity in that honesty, a quiet liberation in being fully known, even if it means being misunderstood. You no longer seek to be liked. You seek to be aligned. You no longer seek to be perfect. You seek to be whole. And in this wholeness, you begin to inspire without trying. People see the way you live, not chasing, not pretending, not grasping, and they feel something awaken in themselves. They realize they can live this way too, that they can be strong without being harsh, wise without being cold, peaceful without being detached. You've become a mirror of what's possible. When truth and love stop fighting each other, when you stop choosing between being real and being kind, when you realize that being fully human means carrying both light and shadow with grace. Machiavelli once wrote that fortune belongs to those who act boldly. But what he didn't say, and what you've learned, is that boldness isn't just action. It's authenticity. It's daring to be honest in a world that rewards masks. It's having the courage to live by truth, even when it costs you comfort. Because fortune doesn't always reward the ruthless. It rewards the real. Those who can see clearly and still choose compassion. Those who can hold strength without cruelty. Those who can be honest without arrogance. Those who can walk alone without feeling lost. You've become that kind of person, the kind who carries light quietly, who holds their peace like a pulse, who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. You used to think freedom meant having everything you wanted. Now you know it means needing less. You used to think strength meant never falling apart. Now you know it means knowing how to rebuild. You used to think love was about merging with another. Now you know it's about meeting yourself through them. This is the wisdom you've earned, not from books or theories, but from the raw, sacred evidence of your own becoming. You can look back now without bitterness. You can look forward without fear. You can look inward without shame, because you've learned that life is not about winning, it's about witnessing, about learning, shedding, forgiving, and returning again and again to the truth that you are already whole. You no longer chase peace. You live from it. You no longer seek truth. You speak it. You no longer beg for love. You are it. And when the world tries to shake you, and it will, you will remember this calm, this breath, this knowing. You've already met every version of loss and survived. You've already faced the worst of yourself and stayed. You've already lost what was never yours and found what always was. You are not searching anymore. You are becoming. And becoming, that's the only forever that matters. If this truth found you tonight, maybe it's because you are ready to remember what you've always been. Not broken, not naive, not lost, but whole, quietly, powerfully, beautifully whole. There is a quiet that comes at the end of all healing. Not silence from the world, but silence within. The kind that feels like a slow exhale. After years of holding your breath, you wake one morning, and for the first time in a long time, you don't feel the weight of becoming. You're not reaching anymore. You're simply here, present, whole. You look around, the same sky, the same walls, the same world that once felt too sharp to live in, and you realize it's softer now. Not because it changed, but because you did. You don't move from fear anymore. You move from peace. You don't speak to be heard. You speak to be true. You don't love to be chosen. You love because it's your nature to. That's what all the pain was for. Not to break you, but to refine you. Not to harden you, but to make you real. You used to ask, why did it have to hurt so much? Now you know. Because without the hurt, you never would have looked inward. You never would have questioned your illusions. You never would have learned what strength actually feels like. Quiet, patient, merciful. You thought the goal was to win, to prove, to rise, to conquer, but the real victory was always peace. Peace in knowing you can face anything without losing your center. Peace in knowing that love doesn't have to hurt. Peace in knowing that truth, even when it costs you, always returns you home. You've walked through every illusion now. The illusion that kindness would save you. The illusion that strength meant control. The illusion that love meant surrendering yourself. The illusion that truth and tenderness couldn't coexist. And through every shattered version of those ideas, you found something purer, a love that doesn't demand blindness, a strength that doesn't fear softness, a truth that doesn't need to shout. This is where all the paths led. Here, to this breath, to this quiet understanding that you are not here to perform goodness. You are here to embody truth. Truth is the highest form of love, because truth sets both you and others free. It asks for no disguise. It asks for no apology. It only asks that you stay honest, even when honesty costs you comfort. You will still falter. You will still ache. You will still forget sometimes what you've learned. But now you know how to return, to pause, to breathe, to remember that everything you seek, clarity, strength, love, peace already lives inside you, waiting to be heard. You no longer run from solitude. You rest in it. You no longer chase what left. You trust what stays. You no longer fight every ending. You welcome beginnings disguised as loss, because now you understand the universe never takes without purpose. It clears what you've outgrown so that you can meet what will honor you next. And you, the one who once loved too much, feared too much, gave too much, you have become balance. You have learned the sacred rhythm of give and receive. You have learned that love isn't about losing yourself, but returning to yourself through another's presence. You have learned that boundaries don't block love, they protect it. You are no longer the wounded one. You are the witness, the quiet observer who sees the story unfolding without needing to control its ending. There's a grace in that, a calmness in knowing you can let life be what it is and still remain who you are. You are no longer chasing closure. You are closure. You are the end and the beginning, the loss and the lesson, the pain and the peace. So take a breath. Let it fill your chest with the quiet miracle of survival. You have endured every fall and risen every time. You have walked through the illusion of power and discovered the truth of peace. You have been both lion and fox, strength and wisdom, fire and foresight, raw and silent. And now you can finally rest, not because the journey is over, but because you no longer fear where it will take you. You've made peace with the unknown. You've made peace with yourself, and that is everything. If these words held you, it's because you were ready to be seen. If they comforted you, it's because your heart remembered its own power. If you're still here, maybe you were meant to stay, to keep walking, to keep choosing truth, to keep living with quiet courage. Share this if it found you. Someone else might still be waiting for the light you've already found. And if you ever forget how far you've come, listen again. You'll hear yourself between the lines. You were never weak for caring. You were only learning how to care wisely. You were never foolish for loving. You were only learning how to love without losing. You were never broken. You were becoming whole. And now, you are. One day, you'll wake up and realize you no longer carry the weight of needing to be understood. It will be strange at first, the quiet that follows letting go of that ache. You'll want to fill it. Explain yourself again. Make someone see your heart. But you won't. You'll take a breath and smile. Because you finally understand that peace doesn't need witnesses. You used to believe that being seen was the same as being loved. Now you know being known begins when you no longer need to explain who you are. There's a sacred privacy to your heart now. You share it with care, not fear. You speak from it, not for validation, but for truth. You know that not everyone will understand your peace. And that's all right. Not everyone was meant to walk this far with you. Machiavelli spoke of alliances, of choosing carefully whom to trust. You've learned that lesson deeply, not through strategy, but through heartbreak. You've learned that trust isn't built on promises. It's built on consistency. You've learned that loyalty isn't about staying through chaos. It's about not creating it. You've learned that love isn't about possession. It's about permission to grow, to rest, to be. And so your circle has grown smaller, but your life has become wider. You have fewer people, but deeper conversations. Fewer distractions, but richer days. Fewer expectations, but more peace. You've stopped chasing the ones who couldn't meet you in your depth. You no longer beg for reciprocity from the ones who only took. You've stopped trying to prove that your gentleness deserves respect. You've realized that those who see softness as weakness are only revealing their own fear of feeling. You, however, have chosen the harder road to remain open, to still believe in love even after loss, to still believe in kindness even after betrayal. That is the real kind of ruthless, the kind that refuses to let bitterness become your language. You still feel everything. You just don't let it consume you. You still hope, but you no longer cling. You still care, but you don't self-destruct. That balance, that quiet, impossible grace, that's what makes you powerful. The world still tries to test you. It offers you old temptations wrapped in new disguises. It whispers that maybe this time, chaos will feel like passion again. But you know better now. You know peace is not boredom. You know steadiness is not dullness. You know safety is not a trap. You no longer confuse calm for emptiness. You no longer confuse distance for disinterest. You no longer confuse love with longing. You've learned to love from fullness, not from hunger. You've learned that connection isn't about merging, it's about mirroring truth. And when love does find you now, and it won't feel like fireworks. It will feel like recognition. You'll meet someone who looks at you and doesn't need to fix or fill you, because they've done the same work themselves. There will be no games, no performances, no punishment for being real. Just peace meeting peace. Two people who have learned that love doesn't need to hurt to mean something. Machiavelli wrote that the strong adapt to the times. You've learned that the wise adapt to the truth. You can no longer pretend that chaos is romantic. You can no longer shrink to stay accepted. You can no longer betray your soul for belonging. And that's your liberation. Not rebellion, not defiance, but quiet refusal to live against your own peace. You've stopped seeing healing as a destination. You know now it's a practice, a daily devotion to truth, a gentle returning to self every time the world tries to pull you away. You don't chase peace anymore. You maintain it. You don't beg for clarity anymore. You embody it. You don't seek permission anymore. You are permission to rest, to love, to live freely. And that is what Machiavelli could never teach, that the truest power doesn't come from control, but from alignment. That the most unshakable person is the one who no longer fears being misunderstood, because you don't need to be seen anymore to know you exist. You don't need to be loved to know you're lovable. You don't need to win to know you're worthy. You are already whole, already enough, already home. If these words find you tonight, let them rest in the quiet you've earned. Let them remind you that the journey was never about becoming untouchable. It was about becoming real. And now, you are. There will be evenings when you walk through familiar streets and everything feels different, though nothing has changed. The same buildings, the same sky, the same air, yet it all feels lighter, clearer, as if the world has softened its edges just for you. You realize it's not the world that shifted, it's you. You've stopped living from the wound. You've stopped letting pain narrate your story. You've stopped identifying with everything that broke you and started becoming everything that healed you. You move through life differently now. There's no rush to prove, no desperation to be seen. You don't need to defend your worth anymore. It's become quiet, steady, self-evident. That's how you know you've grown, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped reacting. Machiavelli believed that to endure, a ruler must be prepared to do what others will not. And you have. You've learned to be honest in a world that rewards performance. You've learned to rest when everyone else rushes. You've learned to listen to your own silence when the world shouts for attention. You've become untouchable, not because you are distant, but because you are deeply rooted. There's a certain beauty to your calm now, not cold, not detached, but grounded. You no longer mistake peace for emptiness. You've discovered it's the fullest feeling of all the state where nothing is missing, because you finally stopped leaving yourself behind. You used to crave intensity, to feel alive only in chaos. Now, you crave sincerity, quiet moments that feel true, connections that don't require translation, days that don't demand exhaustion. You've learned that real love feels like rest, and because of that, you give differently. You love with openness, but not obsession. You care deeply, but not destructively. You forgive fully, but not foolishly. There's a kind of freedom in that, the freedom of loving without losing yourself, of giving without depletion. You know now that you can pour from a full cup, but you never again will from an empty one. You no longer chase closure from others, because you've become your own resolution. You no longer wait for life to calm down, because you've learned to carry calm inside you. And when people return, as they sometimes do, drawn by the steadiness they once took for granted, you greet them kindly, but you no longer open the same doors. You understand that love can be both true and temporary, that gratitude doesn't require reunion, that some things are beautiful precisely because they end. You've stopped mourning endings and started honoring completions. Machiavelli might have said that fortune favors those who act. You've learned it favors those who align. You don't act out of fear anymore. You move from clarity. You no longer hustle for belonging. You create it wherever you stand. That's the new form of strategy, not manipulation, not calculation, but deep alignment with truth. You see now that life bends more easily when you stop resisting what is real. You trust yourself more. You listen before you decide. You speak less, but mean more. You walk slower, but every step feels deliberate. There's an elegance in your restraint, the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to prove she's arrived. You've already been here, all along. You just had to return. You live now, like the ocean, vast, calm, capable of storms, but unwilling to summon them without purpose. People sense it, your steadiness, your presence, your refusal to be consumed. You are not a fire to be fed. You are the horizon itself. This is what the long journey was always about, not conquering the world, but reclaiming yourself. Not outsmarting others, but outgrowing your own illusions. And in that reclamation, you've found what no crown or title could give. Peace that doesn't tremble, power that doesn't shout, love that doesn't wound. You've stopped chasing meaning and started embodying it. You've stopped searching for truth and started living it. You've stopped asking for light and started realizing you've been glowing this whole time. If these words meet you tonight, let them sink into the quiet you've earned. You don't need to do anything more. You don't need to become anything else. You've already become the person you were trying to prove existed. You are the calm after the conquest, the grace after the grief, the truth after illusion. And when you look back, you'll understand. You didn't learn to think like a ruthless strategist. You learned to feel like a fearless soul. You became both the lion and the light. One day, you'll wake up and realize you no longer carry the weight of needing to be understood. It will be strange at first, the quiet that follows letting go of that ache. You'll want to fill it, explain yourself again, make someone see your heart. But you won't. You'll take a breath and smile, because you finally understand that peace doesn't need witnesses. You used to believe that being seen was the same as being loved. Now you know being known begins when you no longer need to explain who you are. There's a sacred privacy to your heart now. You share it with care, not fear. You speak from it, not for validation, but for truth. You know that not everyone will understand your peace, and that's all right. Not everyone was meant to walk this far with you. Machiavelli spoke of alliances, of choosing carefully whom to trust. You've learned that lesson deeply, not through strategy, but through heartbreak. You've learned that trust isn't built on promises. It's built on consistency. You've learned that loyalty isn't about staying through chaos. It's about not creating it. You've learned that love isn't about possession. It's about permission to grow, to rest, to be. And so your circle has grown smaller, but your life has become wider. You have fewer people, but deeper conversations. Fewer distractions, but richer days. Fewer expectations, but more peace. You've stopped chasing the ones who couldn't meet you in your depth. You no longer beg for reciprocity from the ones who only took. You've stopped trying to prove that your gentleness deserves respect. You've realized that those who see softness as weakness are only revealing their own fear of feeling. You, however, have chosen the harder road to remain open, to still believe in love even after loss, to still believe in kindness even after betrayal. That is the real kind of ruthless, the kind that refuses to let bitterness become your language. You still feel everything. You just don't let it consume you. You still hope, but you no longer cling. You still care, but you don't self-destruct. That balance, that quiet, impossible grace, that's what makes you powerful. The world still tries to test you. It offers you old temptations wrapped in new disguises. It whispers that maybe this time, chaos will feel like passion again. But you know better now. You know peace is not boredom. You know steadiness is not dullness. You know safety is not a trap. You no longer confuse calm for emptiness. You no longer confuse distance for disinterest. You no longer confuse love with longing. You've learned to love from fullness, not from hunger. You've learned that connection isn't about merging. It's about mirroring truth. And when love does find you now, and it won't feel like fireworks. It will feel like recognition. You'll meet someone who looks at you and doesn't need to fix or fill you, because they've done the same work themselves. There will be no games, no performances, no punishment for being real. Just peace, meeting peace. Two people who have learned that love doesn't need to hurt to mean something. Machiavelli wrote that the strong adapt to the times. You've learned that the wise adapt to the truth. You can no longer pretend that chaos is romantic. You can no longer shrink to stay accepted. You can no longer betray your soul for belonging. And that's your liberation. Not rebellion, not defiance, but quiet refusal to live against your own peace. You've stopped seeing healing as a destination. You know now it's a practice, a daily devotion to truth, a gentle returning to self. Every time the world tries to pull you away, you don't chase peace anymore. You maintain it. You don't beg for clarity anymore. You embody it. You don't seek permission anymore. You are permission to rest, to love, to live freely. And that is what Machiavelli could never teach, that the truest power doesn't come from control, but from alignment. That the most unshakable person is the one who no longer fears being misunderstood, because you don't need to be seen anymore to know you exist. You don't need to be loved to know you're lovable. You don't need to win to know you're worthy. You are already whole, already enough, already home. If these words find you tonight, let them rest in the quiet you've earned. Let them remind you that the journey was never about becoming untouchable. It was about becoming real. And now, you are. There's a morning when you wake up and realize you've stopped waiting for the storm. No tightening in your chest. No silent bracing for what might go wrong. Just air steady, clean, uncomplicated. For so long, you lived in defense. Even in moments of peace, part of you was ready to lose it. You'd flinch at softness, question joy, hold your breath when things felt too good, as if happiness was a debt you'd one day have to repay. But not anymore. Something has shifted quietly, completely. You no longer live in reaction to the past. You live in relationship with the present. You no longer measure safety by the absence of pain. You measure it by the presence of honesty. That's what real freedom feels like, not running away from fear, but walking beside it without being ruled by it. You've learned that the mind likes to return to familiar patterns, even the ones that hurt. That's what people mean when they say we chase what we know. You chased distance that felt like home. You called withdrawal love because you'd been taught that love had to ache to be real. But now, you see it. You see it all the ways you used to bargain, beg, overcompensate, the way you made yourself small for approval. The way you said, "I understand," when you meant, "I'm hurting." And instead of shaming that version of yourself, you thank her, because she was trying. She was surviving the only way she knew. She was loving with the tools she had. That's how compassion starts, not toward others, but toward the parts of yourself that you once blamed for not knowing better. You stop punishing her. You stop wishing her away. You let her rest. And in her place, something stronger emerges, not colder, not harder, just clearer. Machiavelli spoke of fortresses, of building walls to protect power. You've built something different. You've built boundaries that let love in without letting yourself disappear. You've built emotional architecture strong enough to hold both truth and tenderness. You are not guarded. You are guided. And there's a vast difference between those two things. You walk into rooms now without scanning for danger. You enter conversations without calculating your worth. You no longer audition for affection. You simply arrive. You've learned to say no without guilt, to say yes without fear, to say enough and mean it with softness instead of rage. That's real control, the kind that doesn't dominate, just decides. You used to think peace meant the absence of conflict, but now you know peace sometimes sounds like your own voice saying, "This doesn't serve me anymore." You no longer call that loss. You call it alignment. Machiavelli believed in ruling through fear, but fear only governs the weak. You've learned to lead through clarity, through presence, through integrity. You've learned that no one can manipulate you once you stop needing their approval. You no longer seek to impress. You seek to connect. You no longer seek to win. You seek to understand. You no longer seek perfection. You seek peace, and it shows in how you listen, how you walk, how you exist. You've become the kind of person whose silence feels like wisdom, whose presence feels like calm, whose words land softly but deeply. That's what power looks like now, not domination, but direction. Not control, but coherence. Not victory, but truth. You've stopped trying to make people see your worth. You just live in a way that makes it undeniable. You've stopped trying to fix broken things. You let them be broken. You trust that what's meant to heal will. And you've stopped fearing endings because you've seen what comes after. After the leaving, the silence, the ache, there's always light. There's always a version of you waiting on the other side, grateful that you had the courage to let go. That's the rhythm of life now. Loss, lesson, peace. You don't resist it anymore. You flow with it. You no longer cling to certainty. You trust yourself to meet whatever comes. And because of that, everything feels lighter. Not because life has become easier, but because you've stopped carrying what isn't yours. That's what it means to think like a strategist and love like a soul. To move through the world with eyes open, heart unarmored, feet steady. You've stopped chasing transformation. You've started living it. If these words find you now, let them meet you in your quiet. Let them remind you that your peace is not a prize, it's a practice. That your strength is not loud, it's consistent. That your love is not fragile, it's sacred. You are no longer the storm. You are the sky it moved through. There comes a point when you stop trying to heal and simply start living. The wounds no longer define you. The past no longer introduces itself every time you enter a room. The story that once lived heavy in your chest begins to loosen, thread by thread, until you realize it's just a story now, not a prophecy, not a prison. You catch yourself laughing without remembering to be cautious. You feel joy without waiting for the cost. You trust ease again, not because the world changed, but because you did. You've stopped looking for yourself in other people's eyes. You've stopped measuring your value by how gently someone holds you. You've stopped performing strength and started embodying it. There's something sacred in that. The quiet kind of sacred, the kind that doesn't need to be celebrated, only lived. Machiavelli said that the appearance of virtue could be more useful than virtue itself. You've learned the opposite. Pretending never saved you. Pretense only delayed the truth. You tried for so long to be good, to earn safety through obedience, to be loved through self-erasure. But peace didn't come from being good. It came from being real. And being real isn't always pretty. It's not the tidy version of healing the world applauds. It's messy, honest, tender. It's saying, I'm not okay, and still showing up. It's admitting, I was wrong, and still choosing to grow. You've stopped striving to be untouchable. You've started allowing yourself to be human. That's what real courage looks like now, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to live fully despite it. You don't chase perfection anymore. You chase presence. You don't seek to fix every part of yourself. You learn to love the parts that don't need fixing. You don't hide the scars. You honor them, proof of all the times you thought you were breaking, but were really becoming. You used to think self-respect was something you declared. Now, you know it's something you do. It's the way you keep your promises to yourself. The way you leave the table when peace is no longer being served. The way you no longer justify your intuition to anyone who hasn't earned it. That's the kind of quiet authority no one can take. And maybe that's what Machiavelli meant all along, that power belongs to those who understand the nature of reality. But you've expanded that truth. Power belongs to those who understand themselves. You see now how people move, not to judge them, but to understand the stories that shaped them. You no longer expect honesty from those who fear their own reflection. You no longer interpret rejection as failure. You no longer take love personally when it leaves, because you know that everything in this life has its rhythm, and you no longer try to dance faster than your soul can move. You forgive quietly now, without grand gestures, without needing to be witnessed. Forgiveness has stopped being a transaction. It's become a release, a way of saying, I choose peace over proof. And maybe that's what freedom really is, not needing to win every story, not needing to be understood in every ending, just walking away with grace. You live smaller now, but deeper. You say less, but mean more. You have fewer people, but more truth. There's no bitterness left in you, only boundaries. No resentment, only recognition. No fear, only faith. Faith not in outcomes, but in yourself, in your capacity to rise, to rebuild, to rest. You move through the world, now with a softness that doesn't apologize for existing. You are no longer seeking love that saves you. You are creating a life that sustains you. And when someone asks what happened, how you became so calm, so sure, so quiet, you'll tell them, I stopped trying to be chosen and started choosing myself. Machiavelli said, fortune favors the bold. You've redefined boldness as gentleness that refuses to die. You've redefined power as peace that cannot be stolen. You've become your own ruler, not of others, but of your own mind. Not of outcomes, but of your own presence. And that is what they call freedom. If these words find you tonight, let them sit beside you like an old friend. Let them remind you that the battle is over. That peace isn't something you win. It's something you remember. You don't need to fight anymore. You just need to live. There will come a dusk when you sit by a window and watch the light fade, and you'll notice how calm your body feels. No racing heart. No endless replay of conversations you can't change. No grasping for what's already gone. Just you breathing, steady, here. You never thought peace would look like this. You imagined fireworks, revelation, something cinematic. But the truth arrived quietly, like breath after crying, like forgiveness that asks for nothing in return. You realize now that peace was never supposed to feel dramatic. It was supposed to feel safe. For so long, you mistook adrenaline for aliveness. You called chaos passion. You called inconsistency love. You called uncertainty destiny. Because that's what you were taught, that intensity meant importance. That the louder something was, the more real it must be. But now, you know better. You've learned to measure life not by how much it shakes you, but by how softly it holds you. You've learned that love can whisper, that joy can be quiet, that healing can happen without an audience. You've learned that strength isn't the absence of tears, it's the courage to cry without shame. That clarity isn't certainty, it's trust in yourself even when the road disappears beneath your feet. Machiavelli believed fortune must be mastered, that power was found in dominance and control. But you've learned that power isn't what you hold, it's what you release. You no longer need to be feared to be respected. You no longer need to be loved to be whole. You no longer need to be understood to be free. You've built a life that feels like balance, simple, honest, uncluttered. You've learned that boundaries are not cages but pathways, that solitude is not loneliness but self-communion. You no longer overextend to prove your goodness. You no longer sacrifice truth to keep love. You no longer silence yourself to be chosen. And so, you've stopped performing. You've stopped negotiating your worth. You've stopped apologizing for being someone who feels deeply. That's how the lion learns to rest, not by taming its nature, but by trusting its power. You still love, but you love without losing yourself. You still give, but you give without depletion. You still forgive, but you no longer forget your lessons. You've stopped trying to make life perfect. You've started making it peaceful. And maybe that's what wisdom really is, not knowing more, but needing less. Not mastering life, but surrendering to it. You've stopped trying to outthink your heart. You let it lead, steady and honest. You've stopped asking for signs. You've stopped chasing destiny. You know now that your life is not a problem to solve. It's a rhythm to trust. You find beauty in the ordinary again, the morning light, the quiet of tea, the warmth of your own presence. You've learned that peace isn't found in the extraordinary. It's found in being fully alive to the simplest things. And when fear visits because it will, you no longer fight it. You greet it like an old friend. You say, I know you. You don't control me anymore. And fear softens. It doesn't vanish, but it shrinks, because it knows you are no longer its home. You carry yourself differently now. You walk without chasing. You speak without defending. You love without clinging. You rest without guilt. That's the quiet confidence of someone who knows she belongs to herself. Machiavelli spoke of rulers who govern kingdoms. You've built a quieter empire, one of self-respect, calm, and truth. You are both the ruler and the realm, both the guardian and the grace. And when life tests you, as it always will, you will not shatter. You will bend, breathe, and return to center. Because your peace no longer depends on circumstances. It lives inside you now. You are no longer becoming. You are being. You are no longer surviving. You are alive. And that's the end of the war, not victory, not defeat, just peace. If these words find you tonight, let them settle where exhaustion once lived. Let them remind you that the journey was never toward power, but toward peace, and you made it. You have become both the lesson and the light.